Welcome to the Brains Magazine podcast, a podcast with in-depth interviews and conversations with world-class entrepreneurs, expert coaches, industry leaders, and international celebrities. Get exclusive insight into the world of business, mindset, leadership, and lifestyle with your host, Mark Sefton.
I want to welcome you to this next episode of the Brains Magazine podcast. And today we have Dr. Lori Ochoa. Now, Dr. Lori is a co-founder and the CEO of Bloom. She's also involved in behavioral health and is the founder of Life by Design. It seems, Dr. Lori, you found a lot of things.
I have, yes. Very passionate about a lot of things.
It must be very rewarding and probably really taps into some of that sweet spot energy when you're the founder of so many things. Because I find that when we are creative and we are creating, that's really when we really get into like the fullness of self, isn't it?
Oh, you said it so beautifully. It's really savoring and being connected with life in a very meaningful way that brings so much fulfillment and joy. Yes, when you're in that creative flow and that process, it really has enriched my life in so many ways.
Yeah, it blows my mind, how I obviously within my circle and probably within yours, right? And sometimes I probably get a little bit distracted by my circle, because my circle obviously, are people that are wanting to improve themselves, to be the best version of themselves. But then there's a lot of society that are just like, they are sleepwalking through life and are so reactive and not intentional. And yet the people like you and I that are really are driven and intentional, I couldn't live any other way. Could you?
Oh, that is a really great point. There was a time in my life where I wasn't living with very clear intention. And I'm in the process of writing a book, a personal memoir and personal development book on my journey through that. I think it's really, for me, I had to get connected to my values. And I think a lot of times people are going through life chasing happiness or chasing the carrot or chasing the next goal and really missing the boat on what are you connected to in terms of your values in this present moment today, and how can you embody and live your values fully connected with life, with others, with yourself in a way that's meaningful and aligned with your values in this very moment. I think that's where people get stuck, is because they're missing this moment right now because they're always living in the future or in the past.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, being present and conscious of, and I think it comes down to self-awareness, doesn't it? It's our ability to know self, ability to know what our greatest needs are, and then our ability and conviction to hold true to what is most important. And the only way we know that is by self-reflection and knowing self.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what I'm all about, is helping people to connect and go within and do that self-reflection work that maybe they have avoided or they don't have the tools on how to do that. And so that's where I come in to really help people to get connected to what deeply matters to them and live a life that's aligned with their values. And so they can live with more, intention.
Well, we're going to have a lot of fun, I think, because, love psychology, love human behavior, love all that stuff. So this is going to be interesting. But I'd love to know from the get-go, like, why are you so passionate about using the science of psychology and behavior to optimize our own well-being, the vitality of life, and maximizing, human potential? What is it about that you're so pumped about?
I think for me, I had a personal journey with my son, and who was born profoundly deaf. And I struggled to really connect to my emotions, to my pain. And I didn't have purpose during that time because I was so caught up in my anxiety, my stress, my worry. And yes, I had purpose when it came to being a mother and an entrepreneur and a professor, but I didn't know how to fully align with that. My behavior did not align with what was meaningful for me at the time. And so because I was struggling with all this pain and this emotion of acceptance, in fact, I was living in resistance. And by living in resistance, I really avoided to deal with some of these painful thoughts and emotions that were coming up for me. And so it wasn't until I pursued my own personal development journey through psychology, through behavior analysis, and acceptance and commitment training, which is teaching people how to be psychologically flexible, to manage their stress, to be open to processing painful thoughts and emotions, to live connected, more aligned with their values. It wasn't until I adopted these strategies in my own life. See, it's one thing to read about it in a textbook or learn it in graduate school. It's another thing to actually adopt it and live it daily in your own life. So once I started to do that with my son when he was born profoundly deaf, and I was struggling as a mother with my own set of challenges, and I started to notice and observe my own thoughts and my own behaviors, and recognizing, oh, I'm actually engaging in experiential avoidance. This is what's keeping me disconnected from showing up authentically, fully aligned in my purpose as a professor, as an entrepreneur, as a mother. And so then I started to recognize that these are life tools that so many of us need in order to overcome our challenges, our stressors, our barriers. And oftentimes we're not taught these skills. To me, these are just evidence-based life skills that I teach people to help them overcome their stressors and really to find purpose through your pain. I think that's so vital. Finding purpose through your pain is, for me, one of the biggest achievements for me, and just being able to overcome my own personal struggle, but be able to give back in a way that's of connection and contribution to others.
Yeah, it's very much our belief determine our behavior, and that's kind of like what I'm really hearing. So that's why rather than avoiding that which we know is true, or even changing what we believe is true, because if our belief changes, then our behavior changes, and the only way that can change is when we sit with self, when we are reflective. Like you were saying, like we avoid the difficult because it feels too overwhelming, and we live in a world that's all about preservation and protecting. So the idea of being vulnerable and undressed is something that we've always kind of looked to not put ourselves in, but then actually until we really allow like some of the inward journey and acknowledgement of our own pain, then we're not able to process that. So I would love to know from your point of view, because I'm always fascinated by different hacks, different tools, different ways in which we deal. But how do you go about dealing with anxiety and painful emotions?
Sure. I think first I look at for a client, I assess their current behavior and I assess their language and also the language that is happening within their context. So, for example, if a client comes to me and says, I feel like I'm a failure, for example, or I feel like I am dropping the ball. And then I ask them, well, what's their current, coping? How are they currently coping with that? And what I look at is, does the individual engage in escape or avoidant behaviors where it's keeping them stuck? It's keeping them from really looking at their thoughts from a perspective where it's objective. So, for example, if somebody comes home after work and says, I feel like I failed as a mom, and then they're just checking out, they're numbing out. And it could be numbing out through different substances or engaging in behaviors that just keep them checked out. Then we look at, they're reinforcing those thoughts. And so I help them to take notice of those thoughts and not necessarily change the thought or make, we turn it into a positive, because there's this big emphasis on positive thinking. And instead of doing that, I help the client just recognize that these are just thoughts. This is what your mind has been designed to do through your history of reinforcement. And so rather than having this tug of war with your thoughts, grappling with them, struggling with them, trying to change it or fix it, or even self-diagnose, something's wrong with me. Can we just simply be with those thoughts as an observer and look at it from a place of curiosity? And in a way, when we do that and we have this perspective taking, it allows us to change our relationship and our attachment with those thoughts. And then I help a client get connected to, when you're experiencing those thoughts, how can you show yourself that compassion? How can you show up for yourself in a way that's supportive? How can you honor your needs? What might this be revealing to you? Okay, because what's on the other side of that truly matters. And can we connect to moving towards those values versus giving into those thoughts?
Yeah, and sometimes I think even for myself, like I can find myself quite judgmental and critical of some of my thoughts when I know they're not helping. But I like the fact that you're saying that it's okay to acknowledge these thoughts, but meet them with as much compassion as you do with critique, right?
Yeah, compassion and curiosity.
Yeah.
Those are the big two words that I use. Is, can you be curious and observe it? Because sometimes it is revealing something that really does matter to you. Because what's on the other side of that complaint, or what's on the other side of that pain, is something that matters. And that helps people get connected to their value. So it's really helping people to sometimes shift perspective, but also not get really caught up in the tidal wave of their own emotional storm. It's kind of learning, can I learn to ride the wave versus get kind of swept up and caught up in it?
Yeah, something that you obviously experienced, having a child that was deaf and having to deal with that. And I heard you mention this word acceptance, and it's kind of interesting because I think one of the things that I've really tried to embrace myself this year is this idea of radical acceptance, because I'm the sort of guy, and probably other people can relate to it, where they believe there's a solution to every problem, right? I always kind of like to kind of look for answers And acceptance is probably my least kind of like favorite thing to do, because I always think there's a solution somewhere. But I decided to really embrace radical acceptance, acknowledging, yes, this isn't how I wanted it to go, but this is the way it's gone. Tell us a little bit about the benefits of acceptance, and maybe speak into that point of where, I know for me, it's like, it's really hard for me to accept that, yeah, I can't do this, or yeah, this isn't the way I wanted it to be.
Oh, I love that. We have a tendency, because we have complex language, to label things as good or bad or right or wrong, even labeling ourselves, labeling others, or labeling life. So we have these rules around what we think is right or wrong, good or bad. And we even have those rules around certain expectations, right? We call that the reality gap, the reality of what we expected versus the reality of what it is. And in that gap can bring up a lot of these thoughts around resistance. So, for example, when I was a new mother, and my son was born, I had an expectation of what I thought motherhood was going to look like, be like, feel like, the experience. And that wasn't my reality. And in that gap showed up for me. And I started to judge all that was showing up for me. Very critical and judgmental, and this is bad, this is wrong, I got to fix it. And that is the whole fight or flight or freeze, right? As humans, when we perceive a threat, we have a reaction to that threat. And so the reaction to that threat can sometimes be in the form of control, or be in the form of resistance, or be in the form of escape or avoidance. And so for me, it was about recognizing this control that was actually keeping me more in my pain and my suffering. See, pain is inevitable, but your suffering is not. So I was creating and exacerbating my own suffering because I was in a constant state of control and resistance. So acceptance, this radical acceptance that you mentioned, is about not necessarily saying that you like it or you want it, but it's about recognizing that I have a willingness to open myself up, emotional openness to what is. And that includes what is, in terms of life, what's presented to me, but also what is showing up for me emotionally as well. And just having this turning towards versus a turning away from. Can I turn towards my pain? Can I turn towards what's showing up for me from a place of compassion, having a willingness to be with what is? I'm not saying I like it. I'm not saying I want this, or, condoning whatever the situation, but this is what it is. And when we surrender to this acceptance, we actually become much more liberated to now move more freely. I like to think of this idea around like a metaphor, for example, of, imagine like you're pushing a beach ball down in the water and you're spending all this energy pushing this beach ball down. Well, you have no ability to freely swim in the pool, to explore. So that's what resistance is like. You're stuck just pushing and resisting and pushing this beach ball down, and it doesn't allow you the freedom to fully connect and explore in a way that's meaningful.
I like that you touched on when you said, I think you'll have to help me with the last bit, but you said pain is inevitable, but suffering, did you say suffering is a choice, in the sense of it reminded me of there's a difference between sitting in something and then wallowing in it, which is kind of again what you're saying about that metaphor around pushing on that beach ball.
Exactly, because the reality is that we're going to have setbacks in life. We're going to have disappointments. We're going to have things not meet our expectations or things not go our way. But then we create, it's the meaning and the story or the commentary or the narrative that we then attach to those situations. And it's not the commentary or the narrative that's causing the suffering. It's our attachment to that's causing the suffering.
Go a little deeper on that. When you say it's the attach, so it's not actually the narrative, but it's the attachment to that narrative.
So because as a behavior analyst, we understand that we're going to engage in behavior, and we're going to engage in verbal behavior, language that we have a history with, right? We attach meaning to certain situations and contexts. So, for example, when my son was born profoundly deaf, and I'm taking him to a birthday party, and all of my friends have kids the same age, and we're all singing the birthday song. And this is a very painful moment for me as a new mom. And the thought that I'm having, the commentary or the story or the narrative is, this isn't fair. Life isn't fair. And so I have a history with that language, with that thought. Okay. And my mind is going to attach meaning, because that's what our problem solving minds do, right? It's going to attach meaning to certain situations or events. But if you were to ask me, well, how attached are you to believing that thought as your truth, as your reality on a scale from 1 to 10, at the time I would have said, that's a 10. That is my reality. But then over the years of my own personal development journey, I was starting to recognize and notice that thought and going, okay, that's just a thought. I'm having the thought that this is not fair. I'm just having that thought. And so I was able to sort of loosen the grip around my attachment to that thought. And and that's called psychological and behavioral flexibility. And when I was able to loosen that grip and have more compassion and really recognize what was on the other side of that thought, okay, it's more of this, it's this pain of a releasing and a letting go of what I thought was going to be, and giving myself permission to be with that. Then I was able to come into greater acceptance, loosen that grip around that thought, and not have so much suffering, and just go, okay, I have acceptance around the situation, and this is just a thought that I'm having, and I don't need to be so attached to that thought when it shows up for me.
It's liberating to hear it, though, because I think some people, they've had their experience, they've had the attachment to that trauma, and that's kind of like it for them. They don't even know that they can change, and like you said, loosen that grip on something. Because for me, if something isn't serving me, then I want to kind of like serve it notice, and I want it out of my life, or I want it evolved, or I want it refined, or I'm wanting it so that it does serve. I want it to produce fruit. And if it isn't, then even my own struggles, when I look at, where are the areas where I'm anxious in life? Like, I don't just want to sit and just think, oh, I've always been anxious about this. I kind of want to wage war on that and actually, get it out of there, because it's not helping me.
So there's this concept in acceptance and commitment training around, you are in the driver's seat, but we put our anxiety, our stress, our fear, and our self-doubt in the back seat, right? So for example, let's say I'm driving my bus, right? And on my bus, through life, I'm going to bring on, they call this the passengers. It's a metaphor. And there's going to be different passengers that are going to come on your bus. And some of them are happy, joy, peace, love, a contribution, connection. But then you're going to also be bringing on other passengers like stress, fear, anxiety, self-doubt. And that just comes with the territory of being human. So this kind of idea around trying to get those passengers off the bus because they're uncomfortable or they're threatening, like fear or stress or anxiety, that's where the struggle comes in. And it's this, again, this acceptance around when I'm driving my bus through life, doing things that truly matter to me, my son having, being a mother, being an entrepreneur, being a professor, these are things that really matter to me. It's going to come with those good feelings and thoughts and emotions, but it's also going to come with those very uncomfortable thoughts and feelings and emotions too. And so this idea around acceptance is to recognize that I'm human. It's normal to experience the full range of human emotion, and it's having the tools to acknowledge and to recognize when that's showing up for us. And rather than driving our bus or being in the driver's seat and entertaining anxiety and entertaining stress and entertaining those thoughts and feelings, we continue to stay focused on the road ahead of us, driving our bus, recognizing that they're just there in the backseat, like chatter, right? It's just like background, the radio's on in the background. It's just noise. Just going to be there. And that's what's going to allow people to continue to stay connected to what matters to them moving through life. See, oftentimes what happens is people get distracted and then they give in to fear. They give in to anxiety. They give in to the stress. So it's not about kicking those passengers off your bus, because they're going to be there and they're going to show up for you because you're human. So it's learning to recognize when it does show up that, okay, here's stress, here's anxiety, here's my, fear, but I'm not going to give into it. I'm going to just allow it to be there. So it's changing your relationship and your attachment to it. It's not getting rid of it altogether.
Yeah, I was just thinking, if you drive that bus really fast, hopefully there's some of those things will want to jump off.
Well, then you wouldn't be human anymore.
Oh, funny. How do we sharpen our perspective? Because a lot of things are about perspective, aren't they? In terms of how we see things. So how do we sharpen our perspective so that it is serving us and we don't fall into the trap of, like you said, allowing like anxiety to drive that bus?
So I think perspective taking is a very critical skill where you're able to drive your bus. You're connected to your values. You're connected to what matters to you, how you want to show up for yourself, for others through life. And it's recognizing that when you are pursuing what matters to you, it's having perspective that these are natural thoughts and emotions that are going to show up for you. See, oftentimes why people play small in life or stay stagnant is because they're not willing to pursue what matters to them, because they know that pursuing what matters to them is going to bring up the uncomfortable. So it's about, again, normalizing and accepting that when I get on a stage to speak, or when I open this business, or when I pursue a dissertation or doctoral degree, or when I'm doing these things that are really putting myself out there, like right now on a podcast, it's going to bring up some of these uncomfortable thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And And so it's taking perspective that that's going to come with the territory of doing the things in life that are you're playing on the court versus sitting on the stands. See, sitting on the stands may be really comfortable because it's not going to bring up anxiety and stress and self-doubt and fear. But then you're sitting in the stands and you're watching everybody else play and you're playing small in life. And then years and years go by and it's like, well, why didn't you ever start that business? Why didn't you ever write that book? Why didn't you ever pursue that relationship? What, and on and on and on.
Yeah, that's so good. So good.
It's recognizing that when I'm playing on the court and I'm going to do the things that I really care about, that really matter to me, it's going to bring up those passengers on my bus that are also very uncomfortable. And it's having perspective on this is normal. There's nothing wrong with me when I feel those emotions and feelings. I don't have to give in to them. I can just notice them from a distance. There's the anxiety. There's the self-doubt story. There's the fear that's showing up for me. And I still stay connected to why this matters to me. And so it's really important that people understand their values as it pertains to why they're playing on the court and why they're pursuing what matters to them, because that helps you to ground yourself, to anchor yourself and sort of ride those waves when you are experiencing those uncomfortable thoughts, feelings, and emotions. I like to take people outside of the movie. Oftentimes they're a character in the movie. I like to take them outside of it so they can observe it and they can see it. And by doing so, by taking perspective, they're able to change their relationship. And we also, in behavior analysis, we say it kind of transforms the function, changes the function then of that thought or that behavior or that relationship or that attachment to that situation or that person or whatever it is that they might be experiencing or dealing with.
Wow, it's been so good chatting with you. I'd imagine that people will have to listen to this a couple of times to really get all the good and the meat. There's some fantastic things that you shared there. Really, the one thing that really stood out was about the pain is inevitable and the suffering is a choice. That really has kind of stuck with me, and I love that concept of observing yourself and kind of looking at yourself, but from a spectator in, and kind of getting a different perspective. That's really really intriguing as well. How do people find out more about you, Dr. Laurie, and how do they connect best?
Yeah, thank you for having me. You can find me on my website, drlaurieochoa.com. I'm also on social media, Dr. Laurie Ochoa, and that would be the best way to connect with me.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for joining me on today's Brains podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining this episode with me, Mark Sefton. I hope you've really enjoyed it. Feel free to leave us a positive review on iTunes. And I look forward to welcoming you back to the next episode of the Brains Magazine podcast.